Take a building like Heifer, for instance, and you've got a client that obviously wants that type of input in the construction of their project. You also have to build a building that functions. I mean, it has to have a roof over the head. It has to have lights that come on, electricity in there. Where do you get the license for creativity? Where do you get the ability to say, I know what they want. Right. Now I get to go do my thing.
Well, that's the fun part about it. You know, we're designing a children's library right now. It's going to go in Midtown, and tomorrow we're going to have what we call our programming meetings, a third series of meetings where we sit down with the client and they kind of give us their dreams, their wish list. They tell us the things that they functionally have to have. Say for Heifer, we're going to grow over the next 10 years where we may need 450 people eventually in a building. This is how we operate. We learn how they live. We learn how they work. And so it starts to dictate how many meeting rooms they have and different workspaces and all those things. So we have exhaustive meetings with the clients to pick their brains. And so we develop a program, and from that program we can start to determine how big the building needs to be. And then they can tell us how much money they think they can spend, and we work back and forth from there to develop what we think the building should be. For Heifer International, with the sustainability issues that they had, there was another layer on top of that. We started looking at, well, how much energy can we save? How can we make this a model building, not just for Little Rock, but for the world? And we started off with a fairly conservative goal of saving about 30%. And how we would do that is the more natural lights you bring in, the less electricity you have to use on lights. You put your lights on light sensors that measure the amount of natural light coming in a building, and they just dim up and down. That's a very simple thing to do. But it all gets back to how you design the building to let in that amount of light. So that brought a layer of complexity onto the project that we just started sketching, drawing ideas, and presenting them back and forth. And everything we did over there had to be measurable in the sense that there had to be a payback. If it cost more to do something like a light shelf on a building, what that is it's a mirrored shelf that extends out 3 feet from a building that bounces light off the top deeper into the building, but it blocks the heat from the lower windows where people are sitting. There's an added cost for doing that. You don't see that on buildings often. So we kept a very extensive list of these add-ons that would save them energy, and we calculated out what kind of time of a payback for energy savings that would be. And if it was over 7 to 10 years payback, we took it off the table. So, to answer your question in short, we really picked the client's brain completely, and we worked back and forth. And I like to think that at the end of a project, I like to hear Heifer say, we designed this building, because it's their building and we helped them with it. And so it's not about me being the architect and the person up front. It's about the building and how they live. And I really get a kick out of them when any client that says, we designed this building, because they're as much of a designer as we are in the process.
Let's talk about the Arkansas Studies Institute, the building we're in right now. It presented probably one of the bigger challenges that you've ever had to deal with.
Every project that I've worked on, it seems like, I think it can't get any more challenging than this. Chamber of Commerce was in an asphalt parking lot with a tree and a Coke machine. That was the whole site.
Heifer was on a brownfield.
Heifer was on a brownfield, and Axiom Tower was actually on a brownfield. There was an old gas station there. So with each successive project, the complexity got a little more, and I kept thinking, well, it can't get any more complicated but better than this, because they're great projects. We love the complexity of them. And Bobby Roberts called, and it started off as a renovation of the Geyer and Adams building, an addition for vertical circulation and those kind of things. And as the vision kind of grew, and as UALR came in with their archives, we determined pretty quickly we needed to build a new archive building back in the old parking lot where Farrell and Scher was. And he had the opportunity to take on this building as well. Now, so that means we had a project with a wood building from the 1880s, a concrete building from 1914, and then a new steel building, all in a row on 50-foot lots, all tied together. And these two buildings had in various stages. Part of a wall had fallen down. The basements had been full of water at different times. They had their very unique challenges. It was like 3 projects in one. And this project was the most challenging project I've ever worked on, but it was it's one of my favorite projects because we get such a kick out of the challenge, and we always joke about in architecture, you work for 5 or 6 years on a building and you get one day to celebrate when it opens, and then you start over, but I tell you that it was such a joy to work on a building like this because we got to experience, like what you talked about earlier, what hasn't changed over the years in architecture. Well, we got to work on 3 buildings from 3 different centuries, and they're all viable today, just like they were in the 1800s.
Now, obviously, one of the big high-profile projects you're working on up in Fayetteville is the radio station that we're on up there.
That's
KUAF.
right. That's
Tell
right.
me a little bit about that.
Again, we love to work for nonprofits, and KUAF was a unique opportunity for our firm because they were on campus. They were losing their home because they're building a new building on their campus, and they had the opportunity to get a small existing building next to the main public library, right across the street. And so we were fortunate enough to get the job and get to work with them. And we're taking this little existing building, we've stripped it down, and we're adding on a wing and doing a sustainable building. And the studio itself is going to have a glass window that looks out over the library. So what we like to do with our buildings is get that connection. It's like the Axiom Tower down here is a big billboard. You cross the interstate, there's a billboard of a building announcing Axiom. We'd like to do that even for KUAF. Every kid, every person that goes in that library can look across and see the window of the studio at KUAF. It's a great project.
We talked about sustainability, obviously. What's out there and coming in architecture that we're not talking a whole lot about right now, but it's the next wave of what's coming? Can you put your finger on that?
Well, I think there's a lot of advancements in materials and methods. For instance, this is still a little bit on sustainability, but photovoltaic technologies.
Spell that?
Yeah. No thanks. What that is it's ways of collecting sunlight, and it's in the old solar panels of the 70s are now embedded in glass. They're embedded in wall surfaces. Different technologies that were expensive 5 years ago are half as expensive today. So I think within the next 10 years or 15 years, we're going to be building more and more buildings that are zero energy. That means the buildings are producing their own energy to run themselves. And we're actually looking at using some of those things on the children's library. Again, I talk about challenging projects, one after the other. The children's library, you might think it's just a place for kids to go look at books, but we want it to be a demonstration. We want it to be an alternative learning center. We want it to be a place where you're in class all day, sitting at a desk, learning from a teacher, but you come to the children's library to experience the education. So we're looking at ways that the building itself is part of an education tool. We're looking at, community garden type pieces, and it's just a really fun, challenging project. I'm ready to dive into it.